Hello and welcome to the CGMA workshops. My name is Paul Christopher, and for the next 2.5 hours in this workshop, I will be concept designing a science fiction vehicle, a science fiction ship. As you can obviously see before you, this is essentially what we're going to be addressing. And in this case, it's going to be for a hypothetical production, and that is to say, there's no given production that I'm going to be assembling this for, where I would be having a design conversation with the creative directors attached to the project or the production that I would be involved with. But instead, all of that discussion, all of that is internal. But the approach and my methodology, my process is pretty much the same, and that's what we're going to be dealing with here. So I go into every design job wanting to put together an idea or a concept that has as strong a design focus and has, obviously a high level of entertainment factor as possible. That is to say, for lack of a better word, cool. And that's what we mean to say when we say, "Oh, that thing is cool." There's entertainment value there, right? And that's what we're in. We're in the entertainment business. So certainly our ideas and our designs, our illustrations of those ideas, have to be that. They have to be entertaining, and hopefully too. They will engage the viewer in some capacity that will describe and illuminate more of the story aspects or the project that it's involved in. So you always have to remember that you're approaching this as a storyteller. When you're setting out to design whatever it is that is the design objective, there are certain things that we will be utilizing as concept designers that can make this process a bit more intuitive. And a couple of those things, for instance, would be metaphor, thinking in metaphor, and ways to find a strong visual metaphor to implement into your design. Thumbnails, how to start the whole creative process with thumbnails and finding a strong design catalyst to get going. Transferring words to images, because that is basically what we're going to be doing. In our career, we have design documents and a design goal that we have to hit, a target that we have to aim towards. And all things being said and done, with time management and the being aware of the tones that are inherent in any given production, any given project, to coming close, if not hitting that bullseye, square on spot. And ways to do that are thinking in terms of simplicity, thinking in the most simple terms for your design, simple visual ways of putting those ideas down on a page, for instance, and restricting and narrowing your language of form and shapes, limiting your values, and then from that simple statement, from those simple statements of hopefully fairly advanced ideas, we build complexity on top of that. But we always are starting from stable ground, building solid foundation, and from that solid foundation, building upwards the architecture that makes our design, the framework, which is all supposed to support the grand idea, the grand design. And like I say, every production, every project being inherently different, you will have to, it is your task as a concept designer, when you were brought onto that project, to become as completely aware and sensitive to the themes, to the tones of that project, so that you know what universe and what sort of world or for the lack of a better term, the proscenium or the theater that or the stage, that your design is going to have its action take place in. So in this case, the science fiction ship, I have to think about the various places that it would navigate, why it would navigate those places, and how the how it would be cool. Again, that's got to make things entertaining, got to make things cool. So applying various dynamics into these forms, all mechanically motivated, and you'll see how we start from a block, from a simple form, simple shape, and we just add complexity until it's this fully articulated, fully moving, solid, piece of design. And on top of all those things, we also must be aware, doubly aware, of the time that it takes us to produce all of these results. Certainly you can't go on forever, and more often than not, the pace that these productions go under, that you are involved in, are breakneck. They're quite a sprint. It's not a walk through the park, if you will. So you have to find ways that do cut time. And I have found that implementing in this technique that I will be covering, I am using a 3D modeling program, very simple. As I'm like to call it, I'm only doing 2.5 or 2.75D work. I'm not, though I am using a 3D program, the level of sophistication that I need from my models won't be that advanced. I don't need too much, as I'm going to be doing a lot of the work on a 2D level, and that is to say, bringing a lot of the 3D work that I am assembling back into a 2D processing scenario, whether it's Photoshop, whether I will then print out some of those screen grabs from SketchUp or an after rendering program. In this case, I'm using Carpathia, and I'm using these programs really as a way to have you guys have as much access and have as much one-on-one to this process, and you guys can sort of try this out yourselves and implement whatever things you are learning here into your pipeline as well. Though I will waver in terms of my process, and it's not written in stone, as it were. Sometimes I'll use Maya, other times I might use Modo, but I am just using these programs in this instance so that you guys and gals can use this stuff yourself, implement one-to-one what I'm showing you here. And I will say that like I would love to have 5 hours with you guys, 7 hours. A day is not enough. But as it is, we are limited by time, so I will be covering mostly the 2D aspects of this, and we will be only dipping our toe into SketchUp and not really involving you guys too much with that part of the process. But as they say, on with the show, and I certainly hope you guys enjoy this as much as I enjoyed putting it together for you. In much the same way that the difficult task of sending a man to the moon has been broken up into simpler, more solvable and achievable steps, we so are going to break up the entire concept process into simple steps. And by way of doing that, here before you, you see this page where I'm showing forms in their simpler state as shapes on a page. That's kind of how we want to think of things. We want to think of a box versus a square, cone is a triangle, a sphere is a circle, etc. And in that way, we can begin to grasp at more complicated ideas, more advanced design ideas, and just apply mere shape to them. And by getting inspired, and this is what I mean to think in terms of metaphor, by being inspired by things that we see in nature, which I think is such a great common language, and it's the greatest common denominator of all cultures, that as a design standpoint, we can begin to achieve some of the design tasks and the design objectives that we see, the design criteria, basically the words, and attach significant imagery to those words. And by thinking in metaphor, I think also too, we broaden our design horizons and our design options as well. And I think it's just makes us more engaged as artists in the process as well. And it kind of makes the start point, if it is intimidating for those of you who are sort of afraid of the shock of the white of the page, then it certainly makes it a bit friendlier in terms of a starting process. Also too, various perspective notes that you want to keep in mind as you're assembling all of these images and all of these illustrations for your design. These are very broad sort of picture making aspects that should be addressed very quickly, if only for a moment, just to say, hey, this is where it starts. A thing to look at in nature, for instance, insects would be a great example. Insects convey a certain feeling pretty much broadly. Anyone on this earth is going to have a universal feeling. By universal, I mean a shared experience, a shared feeling. Conjured up by an insect. A wasp, for instance, has a very scary kind of feeling than, say, a moth or a ladybug. So in that way, we want to think about our ships as having a given attitude, and finding that given attitude is our job from the get-go, I'd say. So also placement, in terms of big picture making aspects to think about, the placement of your vanishing points and their relationship to each other and on the page is going to make a huge a factor into the end result of your illustration. These notes, though, I will include as a part of the handout that will be included as a package. But on to it. So I like to, in terms of, again, drawing small and thinking big, ways that artists do that are the thumbnail. And you want to think of the complete aspect, the complete attitude that the composition of your design will have. So you can, by thinking metaphorically, I think you can get to more results in that way. You can also have, I think, a bit more being more engaged and have more fun with the process, the creative process, by thinking in metaphor, thinking of something being sloth-like, being like a beetle. You can have these adjectives that have a very common language and a lingo as a design standpoint. Just as a quick way to get something, get started with. So having a list of adjectives, writing down a series of definitions for your design is a great way to start. Or at least it'll make the start process less scary, and certainly give you more guidance as you go. I'm going to do a series of thumbs here and just work them out just very broadly, not being too invested in them, but, and certainly trying to work from head to toe, working from the whole sweep of the gesture, or getting the whole sweep of the design down, the major elements, the composition, the major forms, the major shapes, a bit of the minor, or at least some of the medium shapes. And if we're going to break things down in terms of size, dealing with small, medium, and large is just an easy way to divide and class things. And right now, you can see we're dealing with pretty much the large and the medium shapes. The small shapes are only just dots at this point, as opposed to full-on forms. Because we are drawing so small, I can work quite quickly through a series of these. And again, just more interested in what the feeling, the attitude of the shapes have. And that is to say, is it fast? Is it slow? Is it complex? Is it simple? And from what angle would more complicated aspects be exposed from this ship? Certainly if there's quite a bit of coverage of a given design throughout the project, whether it be a film or a video game, then certainly you're going to have to develop those angles of that ship that are going to have more coverage. So knowing all those things from the get-go, as you design and as you think of these things, as you design them, will certainly give you more focus and give your design, I think, more strength and more purpose, certainly, for the project. And as production artists, we are always concerned with how appropriate our work is for a given project. That's another thing to think about as well. That is to say, is your design conveying the right feeling? If it's supposed to be scary and people think it's cute looking, well, you may not have done your job to the best of your fulfillment. So make sure your things, if they're supposed to be scary, are scary. If they're, funny or wacky, make sure that they have a bit of whimsy to them, etc. So research that, and again, I say the common denominators those are those universal, impulses are the ones that you should strive for. And that's why I say also look to nature, because nature shapes are typically a good universal language. Okay, there are going to be some physical properties as well that you will have to attribute to your design in the end result. So attaching forward thrusters and a thrust capacity or capacitator, if that's the word, is your job. And to think of that at this point, and how large would your Sinella be, or how what would its makeup be in order to have all of these anatomical features attached to it. So all of those things we want to think about in the broad, simple views, and that is to say the side view, the front view, top view, back view, bottom view. Those are the plans of the ship. And the orthographic view, that is the three-quarter view, consists of all of those things together. So if you want to deal with things at their simplest, break things up in that way. Start with the point, start with the line, start with its simplest existence. And in this respect, that would be the simple views. That would be the side, top, etc. And actually, it's a great warm-up to be able to just think through a design completely, even if it's broad, even if it's quick, even if it's a shorthand. It's something that I think that you should do just to kind of shake the cobwebs, or at least to get your mind saturated more and more into your design thesis, into your design project. And in that way, doing this approach, I think garners the best results in terms of I can communicate with a modeler, with anyone who's going to be attached to this design on a production standpoint. I can explain all of the the design process, the thought process, very much in this way, and it's accessible. It's very accessible. It's readily understandable, and it's self-explanatory, I think, in lots of ways. So if you were to hand off a package that had an orthographic illustration, perhaps both drawing and painting form, that is to say, the final textures, etc., surface quality of all of the things that are a part of your end ship design, and the plans as well. And hey, if your thumbnails are clean enough and showable and shiny enough, then absolutely. And if it's as I think it's a part that is not a must, but it's certainly, if the client would call to see them, I think they would definitely entertain, to say the least. But it's a dicey prospect, and I know some artists that actually don't show their thumbnails and actually have it just be a very internal process. But that I will let you guys establish with your clients. And again, all it requires is an extra layer or two in Photoshop to clean it up. Hey, might as well. So, okay. But certainly I would go through this process yourself. That is to be able to attain a higher level of understanding and therefore confidence when establishing these lines and these shapes and these forms on the page. And here I'll go through this again. Like I said, I'm going to do a number of these, so you'll just see how this process looks of me searching through the plans of a given thumbnail that I've stuck with, and as well which thumbnail I'm going to go with. And certainly, I mean, though I don't go with this one, it's strong enough of an idea of a design to attach some more work and investment towards. And again, not too much time has been spent. It's all very very broad, very forest for the trees thinking at this point. We want to think about the major elements, the major design ideas, and get that all down on the page. Get the gesture, the attitude, those kinds of things. We want to think about in its even in its primitive makeup, in its simplest state. What would all of those things be? The attitude and the gesture. That's our of primary importance and concern right now. And shape becomes form, I think, with a bit of depth and a sensation of depth applied to it. Certainly, light and shadow is a great way of achieving that. And as soon as you carve out a shape with a little bit of light and shadow pattern, then you've certainly applied some form logic onto those shapes, and that's going to certainly give you a bit more, or give your designs a bit more dimension as they sit on the page as well. Now, with this ship here, I've started with the same sort of design idea as a base, and I've actually this was a marker drawing that I scanned in with and I'm applying tones in Photoshop, but the thinking is very much the same in drawing, and so I've omitted that process. And now you can see my applying these next layers with Photoshop. I'm trying to examine the silhouette, that is the complete ship shape. Say that 3 times fast. And really try and figure out how I can even give myself more variation, more variety, a more grab bag, or bigger selections, I should say, larger selection from the grab bag. Also too, since these are happening so quickly, I might as well take another, say, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes in the beginning part of this whole process to do my searching, to expand my options and my design horizon, basically. And by doing that, you give yourself and your design, I think, greater breadth of understanding, greater depth, and your design obviously is going to carry through as I think just being a stronger design for it. So take the time to do that now, because it's certainly going to benefit you to do it now, as opposed to when you've become a bit more attached to some half decided upon ideas that you've committed so much energy to in the laborious process that is illustration and refinement. There is a certain amount of labor to that part of this whole process that I think once you've gotten to that part, your mind is already made up to say that this design is finished. So you darn well better make sure that it can float. That it holds. Well, it can't hold water and float at the same time now, can it? So I won't use that. But you get where I'm going with this, and that is to say, you just want to make sure your design is as strong as possible in as much time as you're given. That is also another part of this too, time management. So all of those things being said, we really want to just think about these things as broadly as possible. And in so doing, I think you can really push these shapes around with a great amount of emphasis and bravado. So, and you can see one shape, or excuse me, one ship might be a bit more front heavy, and another one might have more emphasis, say, in the rear engine. One might have a different kind of posture altogether in the way it lands than, say, another one would. And certainly, I think at this point with this ship, I'm playing with some transforming capability. That is to say that it's not just its landing gear would come down, but say its whole front arms would pivot down to be the whole landing rig. And that might really be cool. Great potential for animators to have their say and their play in this design as well, and to give this design just a greater sense of dynamics. And as a quick side note, actually, one of the major design motivations for this page here, and perhaps you can see it, perhaps not, is a turtle. Uh, Very much thinking of a turtle and how it has the main body, and of course the limbs that come out from that are certainly integral for my thinking of the makeup of that composition of that ship. Actually, quite thinking about that now, I'm really quite excited by the potential that page has. And bit of a spoiler alert, I'm more than likely going to be going with that design. In fact, I actually do at this point know that I'm going to be going with that design. Just for the sake of explanation and over explanation, going to just do some more ships just to show you the variety, the amount of designs that we can get out in just a short amount of time, and the visual language that is expressed one versus the other. And you can see right now one ship next to the other ship. You can imagine how one would, for instance, be more nimble drive a bit, or fly a bit faster, and those kinds of things. All should be felt, certainly, just by looking at your design, so that when this thing zooms or putters across the frame, across your monitor, that its movement, it's everything, its whole is derived from that major design theme, that major motivation. Is it fast? Is it slow? Is it all of those things that it should be? Is it all of those things that it needs to be based on the design document or the design description that's been established by the client for you to then, that's the target, that's the target that you have to hit. And the more you can communicate those ideas on the page, and the clearer you can get those ideas expressed on the page, it will benefit the project, and it will benefit you to get those ideas to the client as quickly as possible and establish a back and forth communication. So that's why I say if it's worth adding an extra layer to make those thumbnails just a bit shinier, more polished, if you will, to be able to include the client into the conversation that much earlier. Again, I know artists that don't, and they will wait till they do the expanded ortho graphic view before those ideas and those thoughts to the client. But again, that's going to be something that would have to be based on illustrators and clients' relationship, working relationship, etc. But I do cover it here because I certainly, it's a part of my process, and I think it's something that is very integral to the process as a whole and must be done, whether it's showed or not, or internal or not, must be done. It's actually, I'll admit, it's actually one of my more fun, or the processes, that part of the process, if you were to break down the whole concept design process, it's one of the parts that I like the most. I certainly have so much fun at this stage, because I mean, you can play with so much so quickly. You can have so many ideas that you're playing with, and establish those ideas relatively short amount of time. So things that you want to think about are the long lines, the long angles. As you draw through your whole design, you want to find big relationships, relate your smaller pieces or your medium pieces together. Almost like a string of pearls gives a cohesion instantly to those pearls, which would just be otherwise unstrung. They would just be floating blobs of white in space. You want to give a sense of order, give a sense of organization, and therefore think about the broad strokes, the bigger relationships that your smaller forms, smaller shapes have. That's also too why another advantage to these thumbnails, and why we do this, is we can then blow these drawings up to a much larger size and attack quite a large part of the design process just in that, just in that really quick way. Just by blowing it up, you can assess the whole gesture of everything, of the whole ship, and get into the details, having had that pulled back forest for the trees view, right? So it's just a great process overall, and it's integral, I think, to getting a strong design out in the end. So I never overlook it, and as I've admitted, I will often revel in it a bit too long, maybe, but certainly I enjoy it, to say the least. But It's definitely prep work, and it's planning. It's planning for what you want to say, what you want to do with the end result, and establishing all those things very firmly in your mind and more firmly on the page as you go. So here I definitely want to go in this direction with this ship. And a lot of these features that I think are quite cool and make this ship individual and all its own. Another thing you kind of want to say too is has is this something new? Is this something somewhat extraordinary and can offer hopefully something new to the world? And have I hate to say it, but there is a sense of cool. Is this thing cool? Is this certainly going to be a question you want to ask yourself as well? Um, and what Nick, to define cool in some respects might be a sense of whether there's enough believability in it that someone can attach a sense of belief as opposed to disbelief to the wonder and the awe of a certain project, whether it be science fiction in nature and it's so grand in its scope and so far-reaching with all of its technical achievements expressed within the project. That all being said, with the vehicles or the mechs, well then it would certainly be your responsibility to make all those things, for the lack of a better word, cool. And that's someone that, or that's, excuse me, that's a term that I think is a knee-jerk term that anyone might sort of go to when trying to say all of those things, when trying to say, oh, that design was really believable. I felt it as it zoomed through the skyscrapers and getting our hero out of the main thrust of trouble. It was cool. Is what they're saying. So, how can we make our designs cool? And a lot of that is going to be through research, through just evaluating your design constantly, and reevaluating and hopefully coming up with better resolution and resolve as you go through this whole process. And therefore, I take you from the thumbnail to the finished illustration. And I want to make clear that I'm going to be utilizing a little bit of 3D, and in this point, it's going to be actually 2.5D. I'm using a program called SketchUp. It's a very handy program, one that I really have adopted in my my pipeline, and I'll show you why as I go along and as I get further along in the design of this ship. I will actually be going back and forth to SketchUp in two distinct parts of this process, and I'll tell you when those parts are. And I'm going to be setting up a very low poly model in SketchUp, and from that I will be setting up drawings or angles to develop further drafting work on top of that base work. So it's almost as a way to sidestep a lot of the labor work, a lot of it's a way to cut time, honestly, and do away with some of the labor work of having to establish your design from various angles and various perspectives. So, and again, it's as a part of the whole production aspect of doing this, for a profession. It is about being efficient, and that program has made me extremely efficient at exploring and assessing and then establishing this design through and through. So, and you'll see how it becomes quite helpful as again as I go along into this demonstration here. And all this work here is me setting up um, for my initial SketchUp pass. I want to basically give myself enough information, and in this respect, the plans, the top view, the side view, the front view, so that I'm able to navigate through all of these forms in SketchUp in an appropriate manner. I'm just this is the plan. This is the roadmap to the journey, because this design process will be a journey. And so this is the map that I'm laying down before I set about on that journey. Sorry to be so hokey, but it's the only metaphor I've got, and it works. So darn it, I'll use it. So all things being equal, you certainly want to project out all of the lines and all of the dimensions, all of the larger forms. At least you want to get a sense of how that ship will look from the top view, from the front view, from the side view. I think it was the side view. It was the first view, and that was the first given or the first known. And from that, series of knowns established in that one draft that we selected, I want to draft up more views, and I will then project out those lines and give myself yet more knowns and establish those other views. In this case, I think a front view and a top view and a side view is more than enough to get started in. I'm using SketchUp. You could use any modeling program that you feel comfortable with, and I certainly, as a drawing standpoint, I think SketchUp is very useful, and I'll again show you exactly why more specifically. But the objective again is just to set up a real quick sort of base for you to then establish yet more drawing work on top of. And the modeling is that's why I call it 2.5D. Is the modeling is not going to be very advanced. It's not going to be extremely articulated. It will just have a low poly count. Basically, it will be really constricted in terms of its poly count, and we won't need too much out of it, at least at this point, or at the various points that I will be using and going in and out of SketchUp and elaborating more design work with the use of Photoshop to then work on top of our image captures from SketchUp. Using also, again, this is another program that I use, and it's an after rendering program called Criccathia, and I welcome you guys to use whatever you feel comfortable with, but that's my modeling rendering combination, and it changes, it fluctuates, but that's certainly one that I think will, for the terms of explanation and making things extremely accessible, because these programs will be, and I'm catering this demonstration for extreme accessibility, and that is that it's extremely usable. You can get everything that I'm expressing here, all these, except for Photoshop. But SketchUp and Criccathia are, I think Criccathia 2008 is completely free and downloadable and usable at this point. So like I say, extremely usable, you guys, and you guys can download SketchUp and Criccathia and just start going to town with your own designs based off of the pipeline I've created here. And as you can see, I'm starting to be a bit more diligent and actually get reference. Certainly Having an encyclopedia of military aircraft would be extremely useful, if not necessary, completely necessary to helping you understand uh, aircraft, its function, its makeup, all of the various types of aircraft there are, and all of the ways that you can bring all of those things into your design repertoire. Um, it certainly makes me a better designer, and it makes my design potential richer for having just gone through and investigated a bit more into the functionality of these things, all of the elements that are going to make up my ship, um, especially as we get into scale more and how the smaller shapes and all of the bits of all the bolt work and all the things that go into the construction of this ship really start expressing what it is to the viewer. And all of those things, again, I think come easier to the designer when some reference and some investigation or some yeah just research, a bit of research is applied to funnel some more insight into your noggin as you put your shapes down on the page. But okay, so I now know before going into SketchUp that I just want the side view to be just a bit more resolved, at least in my head, before I get going. And again, just call out very, I guess, graphically, um, in a brave manner, it's a heavy outline, so to speak, the major elements and the major ingredients that are going to make up your design. So I'm really trying to break out the rear landing gear and the forward landing rig from the main Sonella of the ship, uh, giving it some forward thrust capacity. So obviously some big honking engines in the back, so to speak. These become the major ingredients that are the soup of your ship. And my aim is to take all of this plan work into SketchUp and provide myself with a framework for the next series of drawings that I will be doing right after this. And I'm actually not going to break out into SketchUp yet. I just want to compartmentalize this demonstration and just show you the initial series of draftings and the initial series of design work that should be invested in that first thrust of your design process. So this would be basically like the first part of the three-part process. And again, I'm not doing anything, too advanced as far as modeling in SketchUp, and it's really just to be able to it's making myself more efficient, taking the time away that I would have to invest toward establishing an orthographic drawing from various given angles. This is the way that, because you can provide camera captures from the SketchUp program, and basically provide various angles that you might want to feature various elements of your design, and it keeps everything very well integrated. And I think basically as a package, it keeps everything packaged very nicely. And as a low poly model, it's also useful for other people, other artists, production artists that are going to be attached with this design as well. So SketchUp becomes a way of streamlining all of those things. And again, it's just a quicker way for me to get to the finish line. And as a production artist, that's sort of what you have to become concerned with. So, and here are those views. Here are those captures. I've taken my SketchUp model work and having projected my plan onto a series of planes and cut my lines where they need be based off of the drawing. I was basically able to establish this mock-up of what I'm going to now do, and on top of this mock-up. And it just makes the process that much quicker. A lot of the guesswork sometimes and it's not even guesswork because there are techniques that you know, super diligence and super application will get you this result. But I have found that in less time and with, like I say, a more seamless integration into further production assessment with any given design, SketchUp is a very smart way to go. So I'm tending to use it more and more as I do my design work. But here it is. It really gets you to this to this distance in the race, and still a ton of legwork to go. But using SketchUp in this part of the process, we're able to keep things still fairly malleable, and that is still in the state of wax versus marble. So we can massage these forms or push these forms left or right, this way or that way, to serve the greater purpose that the design will merit. And up until this point, you can still play with scale, and just thinking about the way a human will relate to your design is the best way to think about scale. How massive versus how small it's going to be to a human is generally the way you want to think about it. So having that well in mind is key to how to develop your design even further. And I'll play with two aspects or two different scale dimensions for this design as well, so that you can see how that is interpreted. With this first ortho, I want to maybe have it very large, maybe let's say 2 times to 3 times larger than say the second ortho. And though the forms are the same, it's by actually pushing a couple of things. Namely, in this case, would be the relation to the human being, and that is the cockpit. So anything that relates to a human being, in this case the cockpit, because that's where the human occupant is going to spend most of their time. That's where they manipulate the vehicle, etc. So that's going to be a huge register for the viewer in terms of scaling. Something like this build, for instance, and again, thinking of real world things is always helpful as a designer. So I might think of, say, this might be the NASA shuttle, for instance, versus in the next ortho, something that would be smaller would be, say, a dual helicopter like a Chinook. So that would be the scale of my second ortho, just to imply the difference here. And versus this would be like a NASA shuttle, space shuttle. And as soon as you make that decision, as soon as the scale decision really becomes confirmed on the page and in your mind, that's when that's the major decider for a lot of things to follow. and especially the assets that you would create, and that is to say the paneling would definitely be a different thing on those two different ships. So, okay. Now, also, for the most part, what we've been dealing with in terms of previous drawings, it's been, for the most part, a 2D statement, right? Now we're entering and we're giving our design more depth as we're breaking into an orthographic view. We're taking it from a flat, and that is to say from having only an X and a Y axis information, height versus width. Now we're dealing with a depth information as well, and that is the Z axis. So by now attributing, more form, we also want to apply yet more sensation of that form logic on the page by giving your forms a light and a shadow. By picking a strong, a strong primary light source, you will do just that. By carving out your forms with light principles, light logic, form logic, and keeping things very simple, very graphic, very bold, you will aim for clarity. And that is to say, you want this design, this image, to snap from across the room. That is, when it's viewed from across the room, you want it to be as readable, as graphic, as clear as possible. And it will actually at this point say that we don't, the application of the artist's hand on the page is actually a desirable one. We want to really get that attitude confirmed on the page, and I think one of the quickest ways to do it is with line. And so we'll have a very line dominant and tone subordinate image, and that will keep things very much feasible in terms of the achievability of these orthographic views. So we're keeping things, again, very quick. We're making things as accessible and as readable to our client as possible. Therefore, they can have their ideas more confirmed about the design as well, and see how the whole design is coming along. So one thing I'm doing here, and another thing worth mentioning, is in terms of diligence and actually saving yourself some headaches down the road, is if you break your shapes up into paths. And you can see what I'm doing here is by making selections with my lasso tool and filling in those selections. There's many techniques to do this. One is saving selections out as paths, what I'm doing here is actually just putting that selection on a layer and then clicking on that layer when need be, so that you can see what I'm doing as I'm doing it. That is to say, if I need, in this case, layer 12, which is my background layer, I will utilize it just by clicking within that layer. And right now, what layer 12 is, everything that is outside of the design, that is to say, will be the background, is layer 12. That is not, which is the inverse of that selection, is everything that is going to be rendered onto the ship itself on the page. So that's broadly how you want to think about it. Now, in this respect, I am trying to, as I'm applying a background, I basically am trying to highlight and feature the ship design. And in any way of thinking about it, it's a way of calling attention to the panel, that is to say the page, And I might have been a bit garish in some respects in my approach, or uh, heavy-handed. But again, I just want to demonstrate and illustrate the variables. So I'm going to go heavy-handed with the first orthographic drawing. And then with the second orthographic drawing, I'm going to go very light-handed with the background. And just so you can see the options and how they present themselves to the finished drafting as it's presented on the page. Just so you can get a sense of, is this for me? Is this would this best be utilized in presenting this given design that I want to present to my clients, etc. So, like I say, any way that you can call attention to the page, that is to say, a page that is being viewed in an art department room when ideas are being expressed about all designs, various designs for a project. So that is to say, when creative directors are involved and are assessing all the various drawings and illustrations that are attached to the project, and they can just kind of make a better assessment of things. Any way that you can get get someone to look at the page would certainly benefit you. But then at that point, you don't want to detract from the main focus. So you want it to complement the main image, or excuse me, the main point of your image. And the balance between those things, I will leave for you to explore. But certainly you can witness me doing that here. And things that I'm thinking about, things that will push the dimensionality of the page, the black and white aspect of the page, I'm going to try and be as graphic as possible in its treatment. And in this respect, what I'm doing is I'm actually creating a vector path for line work that I will have register as the boosters. That is to say that the things that will give this ship a lift capacity. Or for instance, if it's to land and it's to sort of come to a soft landing, it would activate its boosters, and those are these sort of these eye-shaped things that right now are just that eye-shaped things underneath or beneath the ship. I will, you can see by masking out the ship and then markering in a solid black and kind of applying and giving a bit of space and dimension to my page by erasing out, right? Erasing out of that deep background that I've then applied. I will reintroduce the foreground element of the booster, the lift capacity for the ship, and toggling on and off the background. I mean, you can see what it's doing already. Just those simple, bits of line work that are those angles that are radiating in and out of the composition. What that does for the illustration. Again, just it's a very quick, very graphic way of just indicating a bit more dimension and idea to your main design. And just again, hopefully it won't detract and it only adds to the main design idea. The king of this is Sid Mead. I actually look at Sid Mead time and time again just to see how it's done. That guy is the master. I really think a lot of the achievements he's made as a draftsman uh, can really be very useful and great information that I glean, and just in terms of problem solving, in terms of being able to understand how to graphically represent these designs in a very sort of exciting manner. Very very just the man has really got it down. So look to the masters too, as as well when you are searching to grow. I mean, I look at Ralph McQuarrie's work time and time again, and John Berkey, and Sid Mead. I mean, those guys I really place on the top shelf of my design library. And that doesn't stop there. There's Masamune Shiro. I mean, it's endless. And again, they're great. There are great ways for you to grow and for you to get a sense of what works, what's been done. Looking at these guys, it really gives you a sense of what does work. If there's ever something that you've tried again and just couldn't figure out, sometimes those answers will be solved if you just look in the right way through those books. So definitely pour through those as well. Um, and a sense of geometry, a good sense of scale, a good sense of proportions, and relationships to things, I think are good ways and good areas for you to be able to stretch and to grow. And though the background might be getting a bit too busy at this point, you'll see that as I omit parts of one layer, which is the gradient layer, the gradation layer that I've just applied, I'm re-emphasizing the booster shapes that I've indicated previously on the page. So you have to think a bit procedurally, and sometimes you have to go too far and then bring things back. But in this respect, I think playing with the booster element justifies me taking it to this sort of big, graphic, bit bold, um, bordering on too busy, perhaps, but it's certainly giving an added emphasis to the overall illustrate, or not the illustration at this point. It's just really a drawing or drafting. Um, but yeah, so you really want to just make things readable, and when I attach, for instance, a title um, and my name, it's just going to kind of get out of be add to the image in terms of providing more data uh, to the viewer, but not overwhelm. And here I'm explaining, it's a bomber ship concept. The landing gear has been deployed and the boosters have been initiated. Sign it, print it, ship it, and move on to the next one. But again, it's all here for further assessment, further evaluation, and to include everyone into all the key players into how then to further refine and further assess the design direction. But from here, certainly, actually take a moment now and walk through SketchUp and show you how that process is attacked.